My traditional name is Wolfstar Woman. I was gifted that name by my elders, Daryl Senior Brass, the late Mistatai, and Linda Brass, Assinipi Esqueo. And my traditional lands are in Treaty 6 territory of the Satellite Cree Nation, which is where my mother was born. My father is from Estevan, Saskatchewan, and I was born and raised in Lloydminster on the Saskatchewan side. It's a border town, small town. I've been here in Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, Otosquenik for about 9 years, and I came to attend the Alberta University of the Arts back in 2011. So looking back on it, I think my mother would say that I've always been very determined and wanting and willing to go to school. There is this famous story within our family about going to check out a preschool. And when we had gone, my mother and I, everything turned out fine. You know, I knew my colors. I got along fairly well with all the other children, but I was still in diapers. And the instructor, the teacher had said, well, only big girls are allowed to come to preschool. So as the story goes, I go home, take them off immediately, and there I was going to preschool. I was immediately potty trained. So I think my mom would say that that strength and kind of determination to do what I need to do in life, to charge ahead like the buffalo, that's kind of been a part of my character since the get-go. I have always charted my own course, I think, aside from perhaps the influences that were around me. Lots were positive and some were negative. I think growing up in a small, very racist town, unknowingly growing up, that had shaped me without being very aware as a young individual. And being told that I look white, continue to pretend to be white because life would be easier for you, that as an adult looking back on it is very harmful. And I would never wish that upon anybody, to deny who they are. And I think that had really laid the groundwork for what I would create as my educational journey moving forward, especially being an artist. And so I went to Catholic school throughout my entire life. My family was raised Catholic. My mom had gone to residential school. I was the very first child not to go to residential school within this generation, and also the first one within my immediate family to go to post-secondary. And this was something that was told to me from a very young age. You need to go to university, you need to get an education, you need to better yourself and put yourself in a better place than what we had the option to do. So I think both of my parents, seeing that they had wanted more from life but couldn't perhaps get to that state with all of the externals that were going on, and the internals, of course, that are very difficult to battle at times. Seeing my sister and I now here in what we call the big city is, it gives them hope. And I think that it gives my nieces and my nephews, I hope, inspiration to continue to move forward and see that they also have opportunities lying ahead for them. So being raised in that Catholic institution from a very young age, elementary to high school, I eventually turned away from the church when I was 12 years old. And I realized even singing the Canadian anthem wasn't for me. I felt that there was a lot of hypocrisy around that time from within our small community. And at the age of 12, that's when I decided that I needed to find a new route. I need to find who I was. And so I started to question a lot, but I wasn't able to ask those questions until I was a lot older. So until I became an adult, I started living on my own. I came to Calgary, Mohkinstsis, Etoskwanik, and began finding my community. So at the time in high school, there was a big break within our family. My parents had separated. My brother and I, we started looking over, watching after my younger sister. And for 3 years, that was a lot of work, being the extra parent in life. And so I think my instructors could see that I needed a break, and one of the career counselors actually approached me and said there's an opportunity for an exchange. They said that you could either go to Germany or Spain, and at the time, like I said, having been raised more in the Euro westernized centric lens, that Germany was very much an inspiration to me to go back and to relearn our culture from that side of our family. Having been raised in this small town, there didn't seem to be a lot of culture other than the large Ukrainian community that was surrounding us. But I would see my Indigenous brothers and sisters, and there was very few, and the relations that we had were very minimal surrounding us. So that that positivity of our identity wasn't there. And so going to Germany actually helped me realize that I needed to come back home and offer my forgiveness to things that had happened to myself, to my mother, to my brother, to all of our family members who were still on the reserve and who had gone through systematic abuse and intergenerational traumas, that coming home to find that history and to speak out about it was really important to me. Because when you go to other countries and you visit other countries, you realize that the stories they're told about Canada isn't the real one. And what is shared with them is it paints a pretty picture that isn't the true history. And so realizing that at the time, but without being able to find my voice and utilize it just yet, I needed to come back and rebuild myself as a young person. So that's what led me coming to Calgary, coming to art school, and to start sharing my experiences by finding those who I have a kindred spirit with, and those who have had similar experiences. Because without that community and without that strength around you, it doesn't build a good environment for you to feel welcomed, for you to feel supported. And so I think that's what really we need to be focusing on, is set aside those differences, but focus more on our similarities and where we can connect and we can heal. I received a lot of education from non-conventional means. When we look outside of the educational institutions that we're so familiar with, then we get more into education within community, educational experience. And by placing ourselves in the environments in which we learn through doing, and by utilizing our hands and utilizing our skills in other ways, that it's more of an experiential education that I took the most from, aside from having gone through, earn my my GED and bachelor's in arts, and now going to be going back for prerequisites in psychology. Aside from all of that, it's a very structured system, and it's very good in terms of learning determination, learning a discipline, but we can also learn those things from community as well. And I think that I akin that to being an artist, where a lot of people are self-taught, and some have gone through educational means. And neither or are lesser than. They're just different routes. And when we think about it, so many different streams lead to the river. So there are multiple routes to get where you want to go. I think one of the questions here was about families. What would you want to say to families who would support an individual going to into education? And it would be to support their decision, because there's a lot of changes that are going on for a young person, and for them to change their minds, that's okay. Yes, it might take extra amount of funds, extra amount of time to apply to awards, bursaries, scholarships, but it's just supporting young people in their dreams and helping to direct them, to show them alternative ways of living in a healthy state. Because if somebody has a passion, why squash that? And I think that's what I've seen by going through ACAD at the time. Was there's a lot of families, a lot of parents that didn't agree or support their children going for an arts education. And yet so many positives have come from that. They learn problem solving is number one, and that can be utilized in so many different areas of their life into the future. And yet we really lessen the value on creatives, and yet as human beings we're all creative. So there are multiple routes that I had to take in order to obtain my BFA. And that was primarily through familial help. I know that not everybody is able to access their family for support in that way. I also had to go through the government for taking student loans. But every single year, I'd also have a part-time job, and I'd be working to pay my way to meet that tuition gap. So I had applied for awards, bursaries, and scholarships. At the time, I didn't receive any of them, but that's definitely a route that I would encourage anybody to take, because especially being an Indigenous person, there are lots of awards, bursaries, and scholarships that are out there for the taking, and it just requires an essay, usually. How they might be able to pay their way going through the educational system now, it's, how do I put it? There's a false narrative that's going around that the government pays our way as Indigenous peoples. They don't. And sometimes neither does our nation. There's a lot that goes into applying for money for school. And sometimes, unfortunately, it comes down to nepotism. If your family isn't in with the chief and council, and if they aren't aware of you as an individual, you might be not looked at the same and not granted the funds that are there for individuals who are on the reserve. And that is okay. For us who are Bill C-31, I had to apply and go through Freehorse, that's through Edmonton, but I also had a very hard time going through the application, and I wasn't successful, which is why I had to go to the fallback of obtaining student loans and going through my family to help me obtain my educational journey. And so nowadays, you have to really work hard at it. Not only having multiple jobs, but also making sure that you write those essays to receive the awards, scholarships, and bursaries. I really had to adapt my education to a fit my traditional teachings, where the education that we receive through the institution is so very structured and it's linear, where when you're in ceremony and when you're with community, it's not like that at all. And the holistic mindset of many Indigenous tribal nations' worldview is circular. And it's something that is currently being rebuilt the more that we gather together and we help out in camp and we do all of the extra preparations that need to happen before we get to, let's say, a big ceremony. But those are things that we're relearning as the current generation, the past generation, and the one that's still to come. And so I think my traditional teachings, they've really influenced where I want to go with my educational journey, to eventually give back to community, but also not to take the systematic westernized structure for what it is. I'm at a place now where I'm looking at those structures and wanting to change them. And I'm also looking to my sisters, my brothers who have already been doing that work and have charted that way forward, because there's many people who are doing similar work in different fields, and that we don't need to recreate the wheel in terms of how do we decolonize these systematic ways of thinking to better support those who are up and coming. So I think my number one advice for those who are looking to pursue an educational journey is to really advocate for yourself, advocate for your needs. Don't take what is given to you. There are so many different routes that you can change the course of for yourself and for those yet to come, so that we all learn better ways of working together, and not to continue to be angry like I was as a young person, being very misunderstood, and I didn't know the long history of this country at the time, but I knew that something was wrong. And by feeling that internally in my bones, in my blood, something was wrong, there are other ways of working through that. And I really have a lot of hope for those who are the youth and the changes that are going to be made. I think if I was to give my 7-year-old self some kind of advice, it would be to continue to charge on ahead, listen to your intuition, and remember, no means no. It definitely was worth it for me. Even at the time where I know as a young person, you're not quite aware of alternative ways of working and alternative methods of learning. Even if you don't know your own learning style, then it really makes it hard for a person to be within a systematic structure that doesn't quite fit their momentum moving forward. But I wouldn't change it. I learned so much. The instructors that I met, all of my peers, the education through experience that I received, I really enjoyed all of that. And of course, we need to make mistakes, and we need to make the correction from learning through our actions. And nobody's a saint. I'm not a saint. I'm not holy. I'm not perfect. And I'm okay with that.